So let's take a look at how to complete this midterm lesson plan part 1. Okay, your due dates will be different, obviously, making this video from a past semester's assignment. But if you take a look, it says right here what you need to do first is open up midterm part 1, the lesson plan, the template that has been provided for you. Then you also need to take some time and look at either this class description, if you're a secondary education major, or at this class if you're an elementary education major. So if you're early childhood education, you're going to go with elementary. If you're a special education major, you would choose the grade level that you anticipate most working with. Okay, so let's take a look first at the lesson plan template. If I click on this, I'll open that up, and then I'm going to, like with your previous assignments, I'm going to go to File, Make a Copy, and change that to whatever my last name is right here. Okay, and make sure that that's saved in my Google Drive, of course. Okay, and then of course I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and then save that. Okay, I also want to make sure that my share settings for this particular assignment are set to anyone with the link. I'm going to change it to anyone with the link can actually comment. You want your instructor to be able to make comments if he or she so chooses on this assignment. So anyone with the link can comment. Okay, and with that in mind, you're going to get started. So it says go to File, make a copy of this document, and complete each of the following components in its assigned color. Now the colors are just different on each one to make sure that you cover all of the steps. These colors don't mean anything other than they're different steps. Okay. Now, next thing you want to do is make sure you get an overview of your class and students. So again, if I'm secondary education, this is what I'd click on. If I'm elementary or early childhood, this is where I'd go. If I'm a special education major, again, it's either of these depending on what my anticipated grade level will be. So let's say that I plan on working with the elementary grade levels. I would click here and take a look at my class description. Here I have a general overview of the class in general. Okay, and I'd read through that to get a sense of how my class operates on a day-to-day basis, who my kiddos are, and then I have student profiles of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different students who are consistently on my watch list on a day-to-day basis. And I want to make sure that I know my class as well as my individual students very, very well for this assignment. So I'm going to read through that, and then I'm going to start with the first part. I go and examine the content standard that I have been assigned to teach, and then I'm going to copy and paste that into this space below. So I click here, and it looks like the instructor has provided a content standard. I'm planning on being an elementary, elementary reading teacher, for example. So I'm going to take a look here, and it looks like my options for elementary, whether I'm early childhood or elementary or whatever it is, it looks like 3rd grade is the grade I'm assigned for this assignment. And since my area of emphasis is going to be reading, I'm just going to copy and paste this standard right here into this area. Okay? And I'm going to make sure that it's the same hideous pink color. Okay, so there we go. Make sure it's that same hideous pink color. And there. Now I just know that I'm starting in the correct place with the correct content standard that has been assigned to me for this assignment. All right. Now the next step is to unpack the content standards in the space below by looking closely to identify concepts and then the skills. And then identify what are the categories being addressed in the lesson. Identify what categories of blooms and webs does it look like this standard is going to address. Okay, so let's take a look at an example for that. At the bottom of your midterm, you'll see an example or exemplar of this. And if we look here, we can see that this teacher has gone through and identified their standard based on the ones that were provided to them, and then gone through and copied and pasted that standard again, and it looks like all of the key concepts, the content, knowledge, information, vocabulary, etc., they've chosen to highlight in this green color. Okay. And then for the second part, the skills or thinking, they went through and highlighted in a different color, in this yellowish brown. You just choose 2 different colors. And then he or she went and listed the concepts and the skills that the standard seems to address based on what they extracted from this standard. They unpacked it. So now that the standard has been unpacked, what we need to do is identify what level of Bloom's taxonomy and what level of Webb's depth of knowledge this standard seems to be addressing. So this teacher has said, okay, it looks like this standard is at the applying level, and then explains why that is. And then for Webb's depth of knowledge, it looks like it's at a depth of 3, strategic thinking or decision making, because, etc., etc. So remember, what you're trying to do is unpack it and then identify what level of Bloom's and Webb's that it's on. Following that, you need to identify what is or are the key vocabulary terms based on your unpacked standard. So think of this in terms of, in the lesson, what are the most essential vocabulary words that I'm going to need to teach and reinforce to my students, particularly my English language learners. So this teacher has gone through and said, well, the most important words are going to be multiplication, division, word problems, arrays, measurement quantities. So again, these are the content-specific vocabulary that are going to be the most important and need to be taught and reinforced. Okay? Now, if you go down to Part D, it says, based on your unpacked standard, develop 1 or 2 learning goals likely to engage your students. So remember, we want to phrase this in terms that are easily understood by our students. So this teacher put, we will be able to solve word problems using multiplication/division to find missing amounts. Okay. Now, notice that there is a modified learning goal for Bruce in this case. And why is that? If we look at our rubric, we need to make sure that we account for all of these pieces in this section of our lesson plan. Are our learning goals very rigorous? Are they aligned to the standards? Are they measurable and specific? Are they related to the big ideas of the discipline? Okay? And if you go on through this, you'll see that it also says reflect differentiation for diverse learners in your classroom. So for this assignment, you know that if you look closely at the students that you've been given a description of, that you have at least one student who will likely need a modified learning goal, because typically they receive modifications, not just accommodations. So this person put down a modified learning goal for Bruce based on his readiness and learning needs to practice basic counting of picture items. So you'll need a learning goal that the entire class will be working towards, as well as consider a modified learning goal for the one student that's on your watch list that's most likely to need some sort of modified learning goal. Okay? All right. Now, again, now that you've developed your learning goal, again, you tag Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge and identify what level of Bloom's and what level of Webb's it is. Now, it might very well be the same level that you addressed before when you unpacked the standard. But remember, our learning goal is based on our standard. Okay, now what we need to do is make sure that we have really incredible, essential questions to pique our students' interest and to introduce the topic. And if you look at the reminder from the rubric, this is our opportunity to do what? Make sure that we're helping our students make connections to the bigger ideas of the discipline, as well as local or global issues. So if I'm teaching a math lesson, I want to try and develop an essential question that's bigger than just this type of math, maybe even bigger than my classroom that ties it to real-world issues. It says, in other words, why or how does what is being learned matter in the real world? Okay, so in this case, you've got this teacher that's talking about, okay, is there more than one way that we can solve this problem? Or if we had a bag of so many M&Ms, what are the different ways that we could sort them? Notice this isn't just about working a math problem, but trying to make connections for the students about how this could be used in the real world. So if you need some help with essential questions, you can click right up here and it'll give you a reminder and a walkthrough of what we mean by essential questions. All right, now, how and when can we make students aware of these essential questions and learning goals before and throughout the lesson? In other words, okay, when are you going to use them? How will you introduce them to students? At what point will you have students come back and revisit them during the lesson? We want you to identify how and when you'll use these essential questions in an instruction. Also, please make sure that they're worded in a way that introduces the learning activities of the day and that can be easily understood by your students. Finally, we need to make sure that on the front end, we're starting to design really good questions that could stem deeper level thinking in our students, help check for understanding, as well as serve as opportunities to engage in discussion. So it says right here, what other questions could you utilize to check for understanding, as well as to facilitate student discussion and foster deeper level thought? In other words, you need to take a look at Bloom's taxonomy and say, okay, how can I make sure that I'm asking questions that come not only from the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy, the bottom half, applying, understanding, and remembering, but also analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So your goal will be to come up with 6 questions, 3 from the bottom half of Bloom's and 3 from the top half of Bloom's taxonomy that are related to the content and skills that you're teaching. So in this case, you've got some of these questions right here that look like they're checking for remembering and understanding, others that seem to focus on applying, and then these last 3 right here seem to be a mashup or a mix of analyzing, evaluating, and creating. You don't necessarily have to have 1 question from each level, but you do need to have 3 from the bottom half and 3 from the top half. So here are these teachers' questions right here. And the lower half, Bloom's questions, are in one color, and then the upper half of Bloom's are in a different color. So with that, that's what the first part of your midterm will look like. Your goal will be to hone in on the content standards, unpack them, and then develop learning targets, objectives, and goals. Then develop essential questions and other questions that can be utilized in your classroom.